Now, we said goodbye to Eilis Lacey twice, once at the end of the book in 2009 and later at the end of the movie in 2015. Brooklyn was a huge success as a book, and the wonderful script, cast and direction of the movie made it a big hit too. For many people, Saoirse Ronan is Eilis Lacey. And the author himself makes a guest appearance in the movie as a worried-looking immigrant in the queue behind Eilis at Ellis Island. And I can tell you he went to very great lengths to get into character for that very short appearance. There were days of staying in character so that this would be convincing when he did it. Now Eilis is back after 20 years living in Long Island with her husband and 2 children in an enclave composed of Tony's extended Italian-American family. We had a sense of unfinished business at the end of Brooklyn. That business returns in full force in this extraordinary sequel. Readers longing for a return to Enniscorthy get their wish, and a complicated, fascinating woman has to negotiate her way through unexpected plot twists in that now iconic Irish town. Colm has just finished an 8-week tour of America and Europe promoting the book, and the response everywhere has been ecstatic. Now, I am deeply grateful to him for joining us here this evening. He's one of my best friends, and I never, ever ask him to do stuff in Galway, but I couldn't forbear but to do it this year with Eilis back in our sights again, and he graciously agreed. To talk to him, we have Elaine Feeney, poet, novelist, and lecturer at University College Galway. Elaine's very rightly a local heroine, and looking wonderful as always. She was longlisted, How to Build a Boat, that marvellous book she wrote, was longlisted for the Booker Prize last year. When I first met her, we were at an event in the Royal Irish Academy, and she was going to recite a poem, and she was going to have a rude word in the poem. And she said to me, "Do you think this will go down okay?" And I said, "It'll be fantastic." She carried it off with great aplomb. Please welcome Colm Tóibín and Elaine Feeney.
Hello, everybody, and it's absolutely wonderful to be here this evening. I did write a little formal introduction.
Oh, great.
So I'm going to read it, even though we have been gossiping for the last 20 minutes, and I'd love to pick that up, but we better not do that on live camera. Just want to let you know a few housekeeping things. Colm is going to sign books afterwards, and this chat should run for about 50 minutes. We will open it up to the audience for questions at the end. Colm will read a little bit also from Long Island. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to everybody one of Ireland's most celebrated contemporary writers, Colm Tóibín. Tóibín has established himself as a masterful storyteller, delving into the human condition and exploring themes of identity, emigration, love, exile, agency, sexuality, and the intricacies of personal relationships. He has written across genres, and his literary journey has garnered numerous accolades, including the International Dublin Literary Award and the Costa Novel Award, and he's been nominated for the Booker Prize 3 times. He is currently the laureate for Irish fiction and teaches at Columbia University. We were very honoured at this university to have him visit in one of his first roles as the laureate to offer some master classes to the students, and I think it was some of the best fun I was ever involved in all my life. Tonight we're here particularly to discuss his latest novel, Long Island, a sequel to his novel Brooklyn, as Katrina said, which picks up the story of Eilis Lacey 20 years later. So you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, thank you.
This novel, as a sequel to Brooklyn, starts with a very dramatic opening and sort of blew my mind because in comparison to your other novels, it was a very different beginning, I thought. Yeah. And I thought, oh, this is very clever, but it's also very dramatic, and it's a catch-22.
Yeah, I was in Spain last week, and I was going on about how I was against cliché. And I was unfortunate at the moment because there was a journalist. He looked at me and said, "Cliché?" And then he thought about it for a minute and said, "Pero el lampista," and the Spanish word for a plumber is lampista. And it just sounds worse. You know, a lampista came to the house. Yeah, but you have a lampista, like who's having sex with one of the women whose house he goes to mend a leak. And he looked at me and said, "Cliché." Oh my God, if I'd known that was a cliché, I wouldn't have put it into the book. I would have Well, I don't know what I would have done because I needed him to do that in order for the book to happen. But, you know, when you talk about an opening, it's as though you do a raid on the central moments of bad fiction. You know, in other words, a man comes to the door. You go, stop that nonsense, a man comes to the door. She's on her own in the house. She's thinking of smoking. Get that out of your book. The man is, she's Irish in Long Island from Enniscorthy, but the man is from Donegal. Yeah. There you go. Like he said, please don't write this. And what else? But it gets worse. And he says that your husband did a great job. And actually, the first person who pointed it out to me, I was writing this book innocently, was Belinda McKeown, who just said, Colm, the bit about him saying he did such a, he did more when he came to the house, the plumber, the lampista. He did more than was in the estimate. And there's a Colm, like really, you know, really, like what's going on here that he did more than was in the estimate? Like he in fact, his plumbing was so good that she's to have a baby in August. And then, and there was another journalist, all right, who did say to me, how do we know really that the baby is Tony's or husband? I'm not giving the plot away, this is in the opening few pages. How do we know the baby is really Tony's rather than the actual Donegal man? And I had to say to him, God, I hadn't thought of that. But I had really thought of that, but that's not true, because what I wanted, the reason the man is from Donegal is that I had a sense of him coming to the door and her absolutely being able to read him. Yeah. That she, if he'd been American, whatever American means now, but if he'd a bigger Republican coming to the door, well, she'd realize immediately it was bluff and bluster and threat. And if he was a Democrat at the door, I don't know what it would look like. But I mean that if he was an American, she can't read him, and worse than that, I can't do American dialogue. Just have a look at the dialogue in this book. Any American who speaks, it's really neutral. It's really me being so afraid that I'm going to use words like, you know, jerk, creep, you know, like icebox. You know, those words that I just don't know what they are. And therefore, he's from Donegal. And he talks to her, Donegal to Wexford. You know, like Wexford people, you know, I don't know what the difference is, but they're two corner counties, and I feel they understand each other. But anyway, yeah, he comes to her to say, your husband, the lovely Tony, had it all with my wife while he was plumbing in my house. She's having a baby. And not only that, but she's having a baby in August. And if you think I am having an Italian plumber's bastard in my house with my children who were brought up, who were conceived in a way that was decent, yeah. I'm not. And I know it's not mine. And obviously you can see he knows it's not his because he has probably not had sex. I'm trying to get a sound from him, like a Donegal man who hasn't had sex for 2 years. You know what I mean? And but I can't actually put that in, so I have to get it into tone. With an American, I have no idea how such an American might sound. You know, I feel every Republican sounds like that to me, but I could be wrong. And anyway, he hasn't had sex for 2 years. He really wants it. And so she listens to him. And the only thing she can think of saying to him is, as a way of calming him down, so what part of Ireland are you from? But she doesn't end up saying that. And or maybe, I can't remember which she does or doesn't. But in any case, he says, as soon as this little brat is born, I am bringing it up here. And I'm leaving it on your door. Now, this is completely stolen from the opening of the Mayor Castor Bridge by Thomas Hardy. Mm. And the problem is, I was teaching this book. I was sitting in a seminar room trying to, talk about tone and texture, and the Victorian novel. And I realized, this is really exciting. That at the opening of the Mayor Castor Bridge, a man puts his wife up for sale. There's an ordinary country fair, and he just says, here's my wife, she's for sale. I'm auctioning her. And a man over to the side says, I'll buy her. Mm. And that evening, that young man, that stranger, that handsome fellow, mysterious, walked out of the town with the woman. And what you know from that moment is there's going to be a plot. And a plot, that in other words, even though the opening is outrageous, I mean, my book, Hardy's book, like, what man did that in those years? None. But I suppose a lot of plumbers maybe do that or think about it. And anyway... yeah, that's the opening of the book. And what happens then is that I spend the rest of the novel in a state of shame trying to recover the book and myself from the shame of that opening.
And I think it's fascinating, though, that you did take that, the Mayor of Casterbridge, when he brings his wife, is it Susan, into the fair, and he gets drunk, and they've their daughter with them. And what strikes me about the comparison, all jokes aside actually, is that I think what I felt when I read the opening to Long Island, I said, here she is with a man's problem. And in the Mayor of Casterbridge, similar too, here's this woman, she has absolutely no agency.
Yeah.
And we've moved in all these years from Hardy, but we still, I know we can joke, would he sell his wife or not, but it's a very believable scene, that
Yeah,
scene
it is,
in the Mayor
He
of
does it
Casterbridge.
remarkably well.
Yeah, absolutely, and as you do with the knock on the door.
Yeah.
And then Eilish goes in and, yeah, she wants to have a cigarette, and I can empathise. Not with the plumber part, but... and then she actually picks up the receiver of the phone to ring somebody, and she has nobody to ring. And that left me brokenhearted. That really did, because I thought, you know who she'd ring here? Rose. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, that's her sister from the novel. I mean, the problem I have is that I have 1 hour now, because her son is going to come in from school.
Yeah.
She's 1 hour alone. And whatever I know, which is very little, I mean, again, it's teaching Jane Austen. What would Jane do? And what Jane would do is she would make sure she was alone for that hour. And that solitude would then give you the character. Because if you don't have the character now in some detail, she mustn't cry, she mustn't scream, she mustn't speak, she mustn't do anything dramatic. So basically, I have an hour of time and about 6 pages of a book to give her an entire sensibility that will bring us down from where it's just been. Now, the first thing she mustn't do is smoke, because in the first page it's mentioned she's given up cigarettes. So that's the equivalent of the Chekhov business of you bring a gun out onto the stage, and the first thing you must do is it must not go off. So you have the gun all the time there. If she smokes, it's just, yeah, she puffs away and it's all fine. You know, you solve the problem. There's no solution to this. And so I go through every possibility, everything she might do. Her mother-in-law is not far away, and they're slightly close, and she could talk to her. She could boil water to throw on Tony when he comes home. You know, all the things she could do. But I can't think of any. She goes upstairs, she comes back downstairs, she has a few ridiculous thoughts. And then I thought, no matter what you need here, you need an object, something. Not a book, not a newspaper. She doesn't turn on the television, she doesn't turn on the radio. She doesn't go into I don't want her in the kitchen, and she mustn't make tea. And we made tea, and it was really scalding. She drank it down. Oh, shut up, Colm. And so I just thought, you know, that business of in these years, 1976, who has a telephone, who doesn't? So in Enniscorthy, we didn't have a telephone. So I thought, her mother in Ireland doesn't have a telephone. So therefore, she could phone home, as it were, even though she'd been away from home for more than 20 years. But there's no one would reply because there's no phone. Her sister that she would phone is dead. And so she just goes to the phone. I just like, give me one thing. So I tried out loads of things. And the only thing that I thought worked was just she goes to the phone, picks up the receiver, looks at the dialing, but doesn't dial, just listens to the tone for a while and puts the phone down. And that's as much as I needed just to give a sense of shock, isolation, the words I can't use, the actual words, shock, isolation, you know, that they can't be used. So I have to sort of show them or hint at them. So yeah, that became, the 6 pages after that opening took much more work, much more erasure, much more adding, cutting back than the first 2.5.
Yeah, and she's very alienated in that moment, and I was fascinated. And again, this is the opening, and I presume that nearly everyone here, we won't give any end spoilers away, but this is the opening first pages. Yeah. There is the most remarkable moment that she actually thinks she might have this little rebellion and not wash his clothes, which made me just go, oh my God, like I wanted to throttle him. And then the actual rebellious act was very powerful with the dinner scene. How did that come to you? And how did you feel for her when you were writing this and her alienation?
Oh, the main thing I wanted was not to go into her mind too closely, not have her think, remember, or feel, but to have her do. Okay. So all I'm doing is that afterwards, if she were to recall this, she would not remember a feeling, but remember something she did. Now I have to get another thing for her to do. Now I'm still not sure about this one, and please forgive me if this sounds like the cheesiest thing you've ever heard. But they come in, I mean, they're all in, her daughter, her son, and her husband. They're at the table, and there's some sort of stew to be served. And her husband is making an unfortunate joke about some Norwegian woman who has been plumbing in her house. And she's sort of listening to, Tony, please stop. Like she wants to kill him. But the kids are there, and it's all going. She doesn't know what to do. She can't confront him. She just wants him to go away. And then she has to serve the food. So it's a small kitchen, so she's just putting the plates, and she gives the kids she doesn't remember first in what order she would normally do that. So she's been doing that for 20 years, so this is an odd moment. Do I give the kids, which of them? But she gives the kids their plates, and then she comes with his plate. And as she's looking at him, she begins to tilt the plate. And tilt it, and then just tilt it. And so there's your dinner. But she doesn't say there's your dinner, she just looks at him. And it's more or less stolen from Edward Albee, from they call it Delicate Balance, where there are visitors in the house, the daughter hates them. And she just says, Mommy, there's your drink, Daddy, there's your drink, Mary, there's your drink, and George, there's your drink, on the floor. But I slowed it down and down and down, so it's just tilting the plate. Yeah. And they all run to, why has she done this? And think she's had a stroke or she's had some sort of... And so that's her way of letting him know. And all the time, she's just looking at him, meaning, now you know that I know. And I know, I know. And that's all I wanted to do. So.
And that she had been so good that they did think she had a stroke showed the nature of her relationship with the children. She's been a fantastic mother, even though we have not seen this.
Well, we can see the kids.
But we can see the kids through Larry and Rosella. Yeah. Talking about the dinner then, of course, and a lot of people have brought this up with you, I know, but there is a fantastic scene at the dinner table in the Fiorello's house. Every Sunday they all meet, and that again leads to her alienation, that she's kind of excluded from the family conversation in a way. And she tries to include herself, and she tries to discuss the Vietnam War. And her father-in-law is angry with her about that. And so she again, she's voiceless in a way. Yeah.
But you see, it's not even a discussion. It is that she's beginning to have these, I suppose, political thoughts, but without formulating anything. So just on the spur of the moment, she just says, well, I wouldn't like a son of mine to be in the war, which, it's not a hard thing for anyone to think. But immediately the father-in-law goes, it'd be the proudest thing for us to have a son or a grandson in uniform. And so the argument begins. But what I'm working with is an idea of plot. Now, there's an essay on the American writer William Maxwell, who was famous for not having plots. He had atmosphere. He could do psychology. He could do that strange moment of pure disappointment that occurs on a day in early September for no particular reason, when a character just feels horrible for a second. He can do all that stuff. And people think it's so delicate and pure, and so do I. And I did until I read an essay saying he was so against plot. And then he even wrote a letter to John Updike. He was a fiction editor at the New Yorker, this Maxwell, and wrote to John Updike saying, plot, schmott. And this plot, schmott. And then this idea, what is a plot? A plot is an action that requires consequences or allows consequences or implies, or the consequences must be plausible in some way but need not be predictable. But everything has to arise from the initial action and must be some sort of consequence of that initial action. So therefore, all these things that are happening are really just a prequel to her going to Ireland, which will be the direct consequence of her hearing this news from the Irishman. She goes back to see her mother, ostensibly. So in other words, the novel takes place where every single moment of the novel must result from an earlier thing that has happened, and nothing else is allowed into the book, and it must move in that very pure direction. And I hope never to have to do that again.
Because you're not always plot focused as a writer, and
anything at all comes into my head, I write down to see if it might work. Yeah. But you can't do that with this.
So how did that play out for you? So you have this action, then you follow it so closely, and that's what you do, just close the whole way along.
Yeah.
And they decided.
And, you have lovely things like someone has to get a ring on her finger. And I realized, no, but she hasn't had a ring on her finger for years. How do you get a ring on a finger? And I think that's the only time I use Google, where I Google that, how do you get a ring on a finger? You use Windoline. You know Windoline? Seemingly if you just put Windoline all over your finger. Did you know that?
No, I know it now because I was fascinated when I heard it, and I thought that'd be very sticky, but that ring scene is an amazing scene, but we're jumping ahead. I would like to say that after this wonderful dinner scene, her mother-in-law, Francesca, who I am not a mad fan of, I won't lie. No, I know people, because I feel she sort of gave her an out. You can go and read the New York Times if you like and not partake in the family dinner and be causing trouble. Yeah. you know. And so I always wondered, did she do that out of love, her mother-in-law, or did she do it out of protection of her family, or both? Because she does love Eilish.
That was one of the scenes where I really worked on to make it as ambiguous as possible, so that the mother-in-law clearly doesn't want this Irish daughter-in-law, because the father-in-law says to her, well, that's just because you're Irish. She said, well, I'm actually as American as you are, because he wasn't born in America either. So it becomes this argument over all these people just think she's the Irish. It's all Irish. And so her mother-in-law just thinks it'd be better if she didn't come, that they could have a much better time without her, A. And B, this is a big, long family, and B, she thinks that she would be happier, you know, on her own in the house, which is true. So in other words, it's oddly enough, the reader and Eilish never works out from her mother-in-law which it is, and the reader never does either. But my job was to make it both kind and slightly ugly all at the same time.
You managed it.
But I mean, that took a lot of, you know, is the next sentence letting you know more than it should?
Yeah. And she comes to Ireland, and maybe, because we haven't talked about Jim at all, the love of my life.
Mine too, yeah.
Would you like to maybe read a little bit now?
Yeah.
That might suit this.
Yeah, I mean, she hasn't seen Jim Farrell really since the novel Brooklyn, you know, since she saw the movie. And so she has a sort of fight with her mother. Her mother is, you know, just less than helpful in this novel. And one night her mother just goes far too far about, you know, insulting Americans and insulting everybody. So she decides to, you know, just to go out into one of the side streets, into one of the streets of Enniscorthy, and what she sees is, sorry, I just marked the wrong bit. So this is her. She hasn't seen Jim Farrell for more than 20 years. She has asked a friend of hers, Nancy, about him. She knows he's not married, but Nancy says that he's doing a strong line with a woman in Dublin, which did cause trouble in the United States, and the editors did say, look, people are going to think that she was a cokehead, she did a strong line. I said, no, this is staying. I'm not changing Irish dialogue just because you're Americans. Like, you're not winning this one. So she's doing strong... But Nancy has made this up. On the spur of the moment, it's just told her, look, he's doing a strong line with a woman in Dublin, which he isn't doing. And
she does think on her feet, Nancy. Nancy's
good. And this is 1976. This is her. She's in her mid-40s. She goes for a walk on her own about 10 o'clock at night, midweek, month of July, early July, Enniscorthy. As she wondered about how she might set about persuading her mother to come for a drive with her someday, she saw a figure standing at the door of Jim Farrell's pub. Instantly, she realized that it was Jim himself. She did not know if he had seen her. He was looking in the other direction, but he might have averted his gaze precisely because he had spotted her coming towards him on the opposite footpath. Even though she put her head down, she was sure that he would not be able to avoid noticing her. There was no one else on the street. If she were to turn her head and glance across, their eyes would connect. She would not know what to do, and she could not imagine how he might respond. Maybe he had not actually recognized her. But if he had seen her, they could hardly just nod to each other or say a polite hello. The best thing would be for her not to look across at him again and to proceed to the market square without glancing behind. An encounter like this was always bound to happen. She'd never imagined, however, that if she were to see him, she would actually feel an urge, as she did now, to approach him, speak to him, hear his voice, but it could not be done. She would have to continue on her walk through the town as if he were not standing watching her from the door of his pub. So soon afterwards, her brother comes into the pub, and her brother comes into the pub and tells Jim that she's gone on her own down to Cush, which is where he has a little house on the cliff, and that she's there now alone. And this is a summer afternoon, and he decides, again on the spur of the moment, look, there's only one way I can see her ever, would be just to drive down now and see if I could find her somewhere along that stretch of Strand in Wexford. I mean, it's a small stretch. And so he eventually, so he finds, he sees her car, and then he goes to the door of the house. It occurred to him that he might shout her name. He wondered if she would recognize his voice. Maybe he would not recognize hers after all this time. He would go down to the strand, he thought, and walk by the sea. On his way back, he would stop at the house again, and he might be lucky. She might emerge or appear at a window. He would have to let her know that he was not going to make a nuisance of himself. That would be important, but it might be hard to do that were he to appear without warning at her door. When he saw her walking towards him on the strand, he realized that she would be alarmed at the sight of him, no matter what. He was an intruder on her solitude, but she had seen him. He could not turn around. Her hair was wet from the water. She was wearing a blue dress and had a towel under her arm. As he was trying to work out what to say, a wave came rushing in towards him, and he had to dart quickly away from it. He felt for a moment a sense of pure disbelief that this was happening. He looked down at the sand, and when he lifted his head, she was there. The expression on her face, not angry or fearful, but puzzled, almost amused. How did you know I was here? Martin, your brother was in the bar, he told me. And you drove down immediately. I saw you on the street a while ago, and I worried we might never get a chance. How are you? She asked. Good. I'm glad to see you. Will you walk back with me? She asked. If anyone were to meet them now, he thought they might be a local couple taking a walk. But when he stole a glance at her, he saw that this could not be true. She did not look like a local woman. Her dress could not have been bought in Ireland, and the natural way her hair was cut, accentuated by the wetness, set her apart, as did the smoothness of her skin. But more than anything, it was the ease and confidence she had. Her face was thinner. He could see some wrinkles at the corner of her mouth, but the eyes were bright and alert, and her gaze was focused as she turned to him and spoke decisively. I'm told you're doing a strong line with a woman in Dublin. Who told you that? Everyone knows it, except me. Is that why you're blushing? He could think of nothing to say in reply. He wasn't sure if she had really heard such a thing, or if she'd made it up in order to break the silence. And you? He asked. I'm a married woman and a mother. How long are you staying? 4 or 5 weeks more. My children are coming at the beginning of August. He noticed that she did not say her husband was coming too, and was glad. He would not relish seeing Eilis with her American husband in the streets of the town. How's your mother? He asked. Well, she's well. He wanted to ask her the reason she was here alone, but every question he thought of seemed wrong. It occurred to him that he really wanted to ask her if she had thought about him much over the years, and if she'd ever regretted not staying with him. Do you like it down here? He asked. It's calm, it's empty. When they came to the steps that led to the cliff, she found her sandals. He helped her climb the loose sand to the first step. As he took her hand, he thought that this might have been what he came down here for, to touch her once, to have her smile as she leaned on him, and then to walk slowly behind her up to the edge of the cliff. In the lane, he saw what she was doing. She was somehow making this encounter natural, uncomplicated. He would get no chance to ask her anything. As the early evening sunlight cut her face, her smile was a mask, but there was no strain in her voice. Your accent hasn't changed much, he said. Sometimes I try to sound more American, but the kids say I just sound even more Irish. Have they been in Ireland before? Never. Nor you, since you left. This is my first time since then. Neither of them, he knew, would have any trouble remembering what then meant. He wished he had been with her all the years. But there was nothing could be done about it now. For a second, he also wished that she knew about him and Nancy. He did not want her to think that he had no life. Mm-hmm. It struck him that since this was probably the last time he would see her, he should say something. But then he thought it would be best to leave it. There was nothing to say, nothing that was easy or simple, nothing that he could find words for now. You look so sad, she said. I feel sad seeing you. Don't be sad about that. That was the way it had to be. And do you ever, I don't know, do you ever think about me? As soon as he'd said it, he knew how wrong it sounded. It was as if he was looking for pity or needing her to say something comforting to him. He watched her thinking. she had decided, he saw, not to respond. When he had known her, she was softer. She would have made it easier for him. Now, as they stood by her car, it was clear that she wanted him to go. She put out her hand. That was as much as she would do. She did not want to embrace him. She would say nothing more. He would say nothing more to embarrass her or himself. I hope I didn't surprise you too much. Not at all, she said. I thought we should see each other, and it would be hard to do that in the town. When she did not answer, he reached out and shook her hand. He walked up the lane to his car. He stood and inspected the horizon before taking out his keys and opening the car so that he could turn it and go back to Enniscorthy.
That was very beautiful.
That's very sad.
It is. It's so sad. And through this novel, I was thinking about Jim. Was he guilty of inaction? Is there a lot about action, reaction, no action? And I thought a lot about action. Because I saw this clip recently where somebody said, it doesn't matter what you choose, just choose something, it will all work out. And I was my whole life thinking the opposite. We must make these absolute decisions. And your book kind of reaffirmed for me that actions do have consequences, and they do matter, but the most deadly is inaction.
Oh, God, I didn't think that at all. Let me think. I mean, my interest was really to find someone who was very much solid. And he was tolerant, he was decent, he was quiet, he was solid. He had no dark side, and he wasn't especially charming. And to get him and see what I could do with him, how I could dramatize. If a dilemma came to him, how would someone like that deal with things? And to dramatize that moment when, yeah, he's absolutely no idea what to do because he's been beguiled that summer by one thing. And yet he's a responsible fellow and he's thinking about something else. So he actually divides himself. It isn't as though, you know, well, you could call it hypocrisy. There's one word for it if you wanted to judge it. But I don't want to do that. I want to dramatize it. And my interest in it is that he's constantly ready to compartmentalize, divide, and pretend. And I'm interested in what that would look like over the summer, where September is coming soon and something is going to have to happen.
That's fascinating. You didn't want to judge it. And I didn't feel that at all reading the book either. I just felt all these characters belong in this space. Some have painted themselves into corners. Yeah. There are secrets that others don't know. But I felt a great deal of sympathy for all of them, actually. And I think it's a true testament to your writing in that. And you did speak about the age of innocence as another one of your influences on the book. And I thought very similarly in that novel with the three main characters as well. I can't remember, Newland. I kind of felt a bit sorry for Newland. He was in a bit of a pickle with two lovely women wanting him. You know?
This is Edith Wharton's novel, The Age of Innocence, was published about 1923. And yes, it's the opposite side of the Atlantic, where a woman comes from Europe, just as Newland Archer is about to get married. And he's a very traditional fellow, and it's going to be a very traditional wedding. And this beguiling figure called the Countess Olenska, who arrives back to New York, where she was born, and she's so filled with fun and life and a sort of culture that he wants but doesn't have. And yeah, the rest of the novel is spent where poor old Newland doesn't know what to do, and the reader just spends his time turning the page thinking, poor Newland, and then Newland begins to behave badly, and that becomes interesting. Yeah.
You said there, her mother is less than helpful, which was a very nice way of putting it. But, you know, we saw at the end of Brooklyn, this woman is going to be entirely left on her own. Again, the loneliness, these women, you know, Nora Webster, there's so many. You have Nettles Kelly, we talk about her, do you remember the shop owner?
Oh, no, I remember. Forget her.
These women that are, they're just up against it and painted back again, like into the corner. But with Mrs. Lacey, she's much harder now when Eilish returns, I think. She's much changed.
I think all of us have had this problem, I think, and it's not an Irish thing, where you go home and say, I went home after, I was in Spain when Franco died, so I thought, well, surely they're going to be interested in this. It didn't even occur to me they wouldn't be. So I had loads of things ready to tell everybody, and I found that, and it wasn't a simple thing that, you know, Mrs. Hayton next door has a new dog, but it would be very, very much about, Harry's thinking of going to Spain. But I was living in Spain at the time. I said, oh, great. And then they'd realize, oh no, because this would mean I would start talking about Spain. And the thing was that it wasn't they wanted to stop you, but they had no interest really in the details of where you'd been, but a lot of interest in their lives. And after a few days, you just wished you hadn't come home at all.
Yeah.
And your bed, there was something funny about the mattress. And you wanted to go downstairs and say to your mother, that mattress needs changing. It's just that mattress. She goes, if you say that, you'll cause such offense.
Yeah.
And she does all those things. She says, you need a fridge, you need a cooker. She's American, she's got all these dollars. I'm going to get you all these things. I said, well, actually, was I waiting for you? Is that what I was doing? Waiting for you to come home? So I could have all these nice things? And then her mother said, that'll eat electricity, which was, I don't know if you're probably from a more civilized house, but in our house, eating electricity, that's what things did. There was a tumble dryer arrived in our house. And I was like, that tumble dryer eats electricity. And there was always a guard around it. And also, if my mother went out, when she'd come back in, she'd touch it to see if anyone had been using it while she was out. So that whole idea of, Mrs. Lacey is not in any way a version of my mother, but that whole idea of coming home from a place where you don't care, the electricity bill is not the primary care. But turn out that light in the hall, and the bed, and also the whole sense of being treated like an 8-year-old, and also the sense of if they only knew what I have been up to wherever I've been.
Yeah.
Where she doesn't tell when she comes home anything. Yeah. And the mother is sort of waiting for her. She's been waiting for her. And she softens eventually, but those first weeks are not very easy.
They're difficult, and there is friction re-entry in that, actually. That's fascinating. And you're right, because she buys the fridge and she buys the new, and they're left there and everybody's tripping over it. But I actually thought what fascinated me was when the daughter, Rosella, comes back, she softens the granny. And they go shopping for the food. And you can see there's a big social change issue with this. She doesn't want a fridge because she can go out to the shops every day and get the news. And that's her social life. And Eilish is coming back and putting her ways on her. But Rosella really has a lovely way with her granny. Yeah,
but all of us probably have the experience as well of bringing someone home who's a friend and watching your family being so nice to your friend and just think that isn't how they normally, don't believe a word of this. And bringing all the good stuff and stop all this. Yeah, so there is an element. The American granddaughter comes home, the mother becomes a human being again. And Eilish has to sit and watch this.
Okay, so is it a sort of she's half putting it on to be?
No, I think
she's a stranger, or she really does.
I think the mother's putting on the anger. I think the anger is what's the pose of she can't. How do you see? I have a technical problem in and it comes up in Brooklyn first. How do you do Paddy's farewell to Ireland? It's been done in cartoons. So the daughter is going to Brooklyn. She's going away for the rest of her life. There's a thing called an American Wake. We all know about it. So how do you have her mother? The last hug was the hardest. As she walked away, her mother gave her one look, a look that burned into her soul and she never forgot. Even as she was dancing the night away, her mother's eyes had burned. I say, if you write that, it will be the end of you. And everybody will. And so you learn, just don't do the scene at all. Just simply have her about to go and have her being there. Leave it blank. And so her arrival home after 21 years, Mammy, I'm home, or what time of the morning is it? Did she come in on the Aer Lingus? What time? How did she get to Enniscorthy? Did she come in on the train? Does she walk up the town herself, knocks on her, say, Mammy, I'm home? And her mother says, oh, my kushler, come in, And you go, please don't write this. So you leave that out too. Yeah. So therefore,
I'll just take some notes for myself.
But actually, it's taken from, just to go back to our literature classes, in Portrait of a Lady by Henry James, we don't get Isabel Archer's honeymoon, how bad things become. It's just completely left out. We learn 2 years later how bad they have been. Yeah. She's about to get married 2 years later. In Middlemarch, we get the first 3 weeks of their honeymoon is missing. Yeah. When we get them eventually in Rome. But otherwise, that idea of just, if there's a big scene to be written and you're waiting to write it and everyone's very excited, he's going to write a big scene today. Don't write it, leave it, and just move on. Spring came. It's the best 2 words in English, spring came, meaning just, I'm not telling you what Christmas was like. And but that I suppose the idea would be that the mother doesn't know how to behave. But I can't give her the constant, oh, I missed you, the whole town missed you, and it's so great you're home. I can't write it. Yeah. And because I can't write it, I have to give her a sort of thing that I can write, which is being incredibly nasty. and mean about. She hates a thing that a lot of people of that generation hated: canned laughter on RTE when they bought in, those imported American programs, and there was this laughter that seemed to come from a can, and the mother's in a constant state of rage about this as a way of getting at Eilis, saying, "Well, that's America for you now. Listen."
You're back from America. Very briefly, I just wanted to talk about Nancy Sheridan as a character. Yeah, I'm getting a yays. She's really changed as well. She's got a really good business acumen. She's changed the supermarket for the fish shop, which the daughters aren't a bit happy about, the new bourgeoisie in the town. I was fascinated about her quick thinking, and I thought, she makes a decision and I won't tell you what it is, but I went, oh my God. I started to get nervous for her. And then I thought, that's brilliant. You're brilliant, Nancy. Because I did feel for her as well. You had me in this position that I was like, oh, stay with Jim, Eilish. Oh no, Nancy, So her development.
Well, I suppose it begins with the widow's pension. My mother was a widow in 1967. So I do know about the widow's pension, and it was really, really small. It was incredibly small. Now, we had a guard's widow next door, and she lived very, very well. She was always going on holidays and buying things. You should come with there with 2 bags, because the guards negotiated a brilliant pension for guards' widows. The teachers never bothered. And other people just never bothered at all. And so there was a thing called the Widows' Association, but the minister wouldn't even meet them, and it was all awful. And you see, the only women in the Dáil were widows, and people just said, oh, that's the only people who get elected as a widow. And therefore, Nancy begins as a widow, and a supermarket that's going. She delivers out the country, which is what the grocers did in Enniscorthy. On a Friday night, they'd deliver out the country. And one woman tells her about Dunnes Stores is about to open in Enniscorthy, and the woman says to her, don't worry, it'll never catch on. Dunnes Stores. And of course it does, meaning that her business, every week she can just see that her little supermarket that they thought were being modern with, like a grocery shop became a supermarket, is literally, no one's coming into it. And so she has to do something, and so a man called Birdseye, I made up the name Birdseye, it's very proud, a man called Birdseye who represents those sort of groups that are bringing in a new thing into Ireland called frozen food. Like, does anyone remember eating their first fish finger? How delicious it was. Anyway, he's selling all those things around Ireland. He's trying to get people to open things. And he tells her, you need to open a fast food shop, a fish and chip shop. It will just do incredible business after the pub shut. And I can set it up for you over the weekend. So all that backstory is there. So she's running a fish and chip shop, which anyone who's ever tried to do that, the first problem is the oil overheats and gets into your clothes. Secondly, you 2 snobby daughters upstairs who are benefiting from all this money being made. One of them is going to be a solicitor, if you don't mind. And they say that actually it's in their shoes. And a girl at a hop in the tennis club in Enniscorthy said something rude to them about their mother's chip shop. And Nancy's living with all this. And the work is awful. Her son doesn't want to do it. He wants to go to the, And so I learned a word in America. America is very useful for words. And one word, the word transactional. That's a relationship can be transactional. And I don't like the word. I wouldn't use it in a book or anything. But the idea that somehow or other what she wants from Jim is, yes, she wants love, she wants sex, she wants maybe she even wants passion, but what she really wants is to get out of her chip shop, and nothing is going to stop her getting out of her chip shop. And I have to dramatize the oil overheating, people being snobby, a man vomiting on her, in her chip. I mean, that's a big chip shop problem in Enniscorthy anyway, like the fucking, sorry.
I'm glad you did it first.
They barf on you. And therefore, she really needs a bungalow out the country, is what she wants. And it's not just a small desire, that's a very large thing for her to want. And so the whole novel really depends on the energy of that wanting, that like a lot of people who have a chip shop in a town, what they dream of is somehow a lane up to a bungalow where there's no one can look at them.
And it really, really speaks to that, and it speaks to class, and it speaks to towns, and then the agrarian class as well, and that whole idea of being upwardly mobile, and the daughters and the son not wanting to work it, but taking.
Yeah, want to be in White's barn dancing on a Saturday night when he should be pouring chips for people.
Just 2 more things, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. I wanted to talk very quickly about, because we're running out of time, about process, your process, that you write. You're so prolific, you write across genres. I was fascinated, particularly with your point of view in this, that you were so close with Eilish in the first, and then we moved to Nancy, Jim, Eilish in the other parts of the novel. And I thought that's why I had so much empathy. That's why I was seeing everything from everybody's perspective. That cannot have been an easy point of view to write.
I mean, it's just polyphonic.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit rich, but I mean, it's not in the first person, so you don't have to work on voices.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to make someone sound like Nancy talking, because if you try that, you sort of lose. I suppose you lose that. What you're trying to do is create an illusion that you are in Nancy's mind. You're seeing what she's seeing, you're feeling what she's feeling, and that you're completely immersed in her. Now, if you're going to do that 3 times in each section, one Nancy, one Eilis, and one Jim, the only rule really is to, as each section opens, you must be completely immersed in their world immediately. Their name must be there, not just that, but something they're doing, something like the oil has begun to overheat. Jim in the pub, someone has begun to cause trouble in the pub. Like it has to, but if you have to do it 18 times in the book, those openings. And if you get it wrong once, the reader gets confused. Who, where, what? Yeah. You can't have that. And then you can't use the same tricks each time, because really fiction is a set of tricks, and you're trying to work out, is there a way into the character, another way in? And so it's not hard, it's not rocket science, and the main thing you do is you read it, and read it, and read it, thinking, is there something wrong with this? And if there is, change it, rewrite it. But it really, I mean, the book was written pretty quickly, and it really wasn't much trouble. And you know,
I've seen some students
but it is. But the question is just reading it and reading it, so that if there's one moment of confusion in the first 3 sentences of any of those sections as to whether it's Nancy, whether it's Eilis, or whether it's Jim, then you're lost. And you just can't do that. You do anything not to do that, and then follow through. That you're working with plot. So you're not just creating an atmosphere in a chip shop, which, you know, oh, the chip shop was hard. That evening when she went upstairs, she lay back, and you could get a short story out of some image she had of her chip shop and the people. No, it's moving on. It has to, that episode of the chip shop has to move into something. So, you know, that's when Eilis comes to visit. So that each time you're working on a section, that section has to move the book along as a plot, you know, in the same way as in a way as a soap opera, that something has to occur that will enrich your knowledge of what is now coming, or your expectation. So each time you're not just creating atmosphere, you're not just setting up a chip shop, you're setting up someone's desperate desire, and then quickly move into a visitor comes, and that's Eilis. And she tells Eilis about Jim going a strong line with a woman in America. So the reader knows, oh my God, Eilis now thinks this, what? And then she does a really stupid thing. And it's funny the way, you know, she invites her to the wedding of her daughter, which will be the end, really, because if she only hadn't done that, there'd be no novel. And she knows immediately, she says it, why didn't I wait? But she's on this, you know, have you ever had a Chardonnay rush without any Chardonnay? You know, and she has one of those immediately, come to the wedding. I go, oh my God, I've invited her to the wedding. And, you know, and the novel then, all the problems arise from that stupid thing she does. Out of pure generosity of spirit. Out of pure generosity of spirit and a little Chardonnay rush.
I could talk all night, and I really wanted to talk about Vinegar Hill, your fantastic poetry collection, but just go and buy it and read it in your own time. If you haven't, it's just absolutely extraordinary, and I just adored it. But the last question from me, you dedicate this novel to the wonderful Cormac Kinsella, and I was thinking about your career and how hard you've worked, actually, throughout your career, and how it's not easy to keep bringing out books and stay on the road. I know you say it is, and you're very magnanimous and generous to young writers as well. I think Fintan O'Toole may have read The South, or was he one of the first readers of one of your first novels? He's in the audience. We both always speak very fondly of our agent, Peter Strauss, and always a wonderful friend of yours, and your long-standing relationship with your editor, Mary Mount. These are relationships that and Katrina, that have gone on through your career. I don't know if I'm asking a question or telling you it's fascinating and wonderful to you know, I really admire it, in admiration of that, the longevity of those relationships through an industry that can be sometimes quite...
Yeah, I think the main issue is just don't get involved in sort of I can't think of the word, it's not self-suppression. Self what?
Hype?
No, hype is fine. I haven't hype. No, I mean just hijacking your own best interests by doing something really stupid. You know, like going to London and insulting everybody for being English. Just take that. Like, why would you do that? And yet, you know. So it's, I mean, it is just, I'm just keep not being able to think of the word. It's good I can't think of it. But yeah, it's just, what? Self-sabotage. Yeah, just like get up in the morning and just say no self-sabotage. and that means that, hype could be self-sabotage. So, don't do self-sabotage in general in your life. Like don't drive on the wrong side of the road, go the right way around the roundabout, just for starters. But I think in this business where you really could ruin something by ruining a relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, with a publisher, with an editor, who could just think you were just toxic.
Yeah.
Toxic.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's just a simple thing. But I didn't know the word for years. Someone told me one day, you don't do self-sabotage, do you? I said, no. But I didn't know that it's not. It's not
Doesn't
unusual.
count after midnight. Oh, it does.
The email sent after midnight. No, don't send it. Don't send it.
No, I don't. I won't. Okay, fantastic. We might bring up the lights and open it to one or two questions. We are a little short on time, but...
So I've been going on a bit too long.
No, it's fantastic. You could go on all night. If anyone wants to raise their hand and... Is there a roving mic?
It's like a class. There's somebody over there, look.
Yeah, I didn't even get to talk about teaching.
It's like a classroom.
Yeah.
It is a classroom.
Turn anything on?
Was it? An education for sure.
Can you hear me? Hi, Colm, I'm from Gorey. First of all.
No prejudices, yeah.
Smaller than Enniscorthy in every way. But I've only just finished your book, so it's every word you say is very fresh to me, and I absolutely loved it, even more so than Brooklyn. And will there be a third?
I didn't want to jinx.
Yeah,
You know what I
I mean, I think there's something cheap about this business of writing, And also, I have loads of other novels that no one's ever read, and if I start writing sequels to them, there really would be consternation.
I've read all the other ones as well. But this was a very easy read over 2 days.
Just that, so it's 14 years between writing the two. So therefore, I'm 69, and I suppose you could arrive at the old. There's some as you know, around Gorey down in Enniscorthy, there are a lot of beautiful old people's homes, and going into
I know,
Port
my
Town.
parents were in both of them.
Ardamine and all sorts of those places. Lovely big houses, and you go up to them, and you could just go up to them and say, "Is he writing anything?"
And Ivan Yates.
Yeah, so I'm open to that, But the thing is, it takes me ages to think of anything, and I don't really have any ideas. But whatever has happened, there seems to be. But imagine.
For anybody from Wexford, it was really evocative for me. I haven't lived there since I was 17.
All right.
To all Gorey and Courtown and Whitesbar and all those things. It was just great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you, Colm, I read it last week in West Cork.
Now, Patsy, you more than anyone knows the importance of a microphone for establishing authority.
You're okay.
I read it last week in West Cork, and my friend and I argued forever about the Nancy Eilish thing, okay? And I'm not saying where my affections lie. But when I thought about it afterwards, I loved the book, but I thought really in one ways, everybody in the book betrays somebody else. It's really, a book about betrayal, which isn't a very kind of warm subject, even though it's... and even I thought the bit about Nora Webster getting too little money for the house, that kind of stuck with me. So
did Eilish
it was
betray?
That conscious thing about...
Yeah, you see, I suppose what I'm trying to work with is that Eilish comes back to Ireland from America, presuming that nothing has changed, that no one has changed, that nothing has changed. Now, I don't think she betrays anyone. I mean, in other words,
There's concealment.
What she meant to do, in other words, so it isn't as though she comes back as almost the innocent one, and she finds that there's a web of connection that's been going on in all the years since she was dead that she doesn't really know about. And she walks blissfully and innocently into it. But it's not as though each person is constantly and willfully betraying each other. It is as though there are certain things that cannot be told at the beginning. For example, she doesn't want to tell her mother the problem's been in America because she just doesn't want that to be part of her visit home. That's the first problem she creates, but she doesn't mean it. And in the same way, I don't think Nancy does much either. In other words, she seems to me to behave almost innocently too. And that the You know, so that it's not. I mean, I wouldn't like anyone to think that I was writing this novel about all evil people in Enniscorthy operating in this sort of, in this sort of, I suppose, malevolent way. But yes, it is constantly about who knows what, who doesn't, which is why each perspective is important, because the reader knows everything. And that's the most important thing. The reader follows. Oh God, please look at the wedding. Just look over, for God's sake, and the novel will stop. You know.
But each action or inaction does lead to sort of...
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
They're all in the right
Thanks
pickle.
very much. What's that?
They're in the right pickle, the characters. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for a wonderful interview. I was just wondering, it's interesting that there's been this movie between Brooklyn and Long Island. I presume you saw it. How much did the movie influence? Like, were you imagining Saoirse Ronan and Donald Gleeson when you were talking about these characters, or writing about them, or was it the original Brooklyn characters?
I think I'm in a unique position where the movie was immensely influential, and that I didn't write the screenplay. I saw the movie a good lot because it kept being shown in places, like it was shown in the university, and then I would be wheeled on afterwards to do something to talk about it. And but I found each time I would watch it, and it wasn't Saoirse that was having an effect on me. It was Donald Gleeson. Saoirse's performance was so, in a way, spectacular that I couldn't bring it down to anything I could work with. But there's a problem in Irish imagery, which is that Irish men, as presented in novels, in plays, and in films, are untrustworthy. They're often drunk, and they're usually stupid, and they're charming, and they've got a dark side. And it's really very hard to work with that, from my point of view. And therefore, the idea of being able to work with someone who's quiet, who's reliable, who's decent, who's never drunk, who's never charming. Charming is almost the worst thing, and who doesn't have a brooding dark side. He goes upstairs with the evening and stuff. He doesn't come down when he has to cut someone's finger. Like it's not that sort of stuff. But he's an Irishman. And if you go into the imagery, into the kitty of Irishmen, geez, there really isn't one, And I mean, he couldn't be played by Stephen Ray. Stephen Ray's a wonderful actor. God Almighty, he's so good. But I can't work with that. And so Donald Gleeson began to work out this way of playing Jim, and very consciously working to get something that was said very little. There's a scene that I didn't write, it's not in the novel, but Nick Hornby wrote for the film. He's in a hotel and he's trying to explain to her, I've never been anywhere. You've been in America, I'd love to go to places. And he's talking like someone from Wexford. And I can hear the fellas I was in school with, just nice local fellas just trying to talk to a girl. And I think, I wrote to him at the time to say, you've done something really interesting. But I didn't realize the effect this was going to have on me. And what it was going to have on me was I then got something to work from, which was a way of making Jim and making him sort of just getting more and more, I suppose, light rather than shadow from him, even though it's shadow, even though he lives in shadow. And in other words, that I think Donald made him sexy in some way that I couldn't see as I was writing it in Brooklyn. And therefore, from what Donald did, I was able to work with that. And so yeah, the film to that extent was I don't think this book could have come without me just going over this over a decade, just letting ways of trying to see how I could work with that, to trying to produce what we might call an ordinary Irishman in an Irish novel.
Thank you, everybody. We'll leave it there, and Colm will sign books after. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Colm.
Thank you. Hey, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.